Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, 6 Common Influencer Marketing Mistakes. We are really excited to have you here today, and I hope that you are going to get a lot out of it. Want to start with just a little bit of housekeeping. So if you can't hear me right now, you have no idea what I'm saying, but please read the screen. Today, in order to follow along with the broadcast, we will need you to use your computer audio. So if you have dialed in on the phone, I'm going to talk very slowly so that you can hang up your phone and go ahead and turn on your computer audio to make sure that you can follow along with us today. And while anyone who dialed in on the phone is feverishly doing that, let me cover off on just a couple other of our housekeeping items today. So questions, please submit those as we go. If you look in the sidebar of this GoToWebinar, you'll see there is a spot to submit questions. Feel free to submit them as they come up. As we're talking, we will answer as many questions as we have time for at the end. I do promise, though, to give you 5 minutes back in your day. So anything that we do not get to, we can also cover in a follow-up email, or you're free to reach out to us via email or Twitter if you want to have specific conversations. So please don't hesitate to do that, but do go ahead and submit any questions you have as we go, as other people probably have them too. We will also be providing a recording of today's conversation, so no need to try to screenshot everything we're showing you, because you will get a copy sent to you via email after the broadcast today. And of course, you're free to tweet. So please do tag at Carousel, and we'll be able to also answer questions on Twitter or give you a little retweet. We'd love to hear from you and hear what you thought was interesting today. So I belabored that a little bit. Let's hope everybody who was dialed in on the phone has gotten the chance to switch over to audio, and let's get going. So first off today, who is talking? You have myself, Erin Ledbetter. I am Senior Vice President of Carousel. We are an influencer marketing company who takes a very different approach to influencer marketing, where you really think of us more, like a media buying agency, if you will, where we're thinking about everything we do with media metrics and media targeting in the way that we handle influencer marketing. I am joined today by a former colleague of mine, and actually a very experienced blogger herself, Beth Ann Ballant. She is currently content manager at Citrix, but she has a long history in this influencer marketing space that I think you'll see she's got some really great perspective to share with us today. So,
Hi, Erin.
hi. So, Beth Ann,
Hi.
I want to start with this, today, just to give some folks who may not know a little context on the history of influencer. I think you've seen it from many sides, and I think some of
Yeah.
the experience, gives some context for the mistakes today. So, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll run through this a little bit. I started my personal blog somewhere in the 2002 range. I was just writing about my everyday life. It was just a fun hobby. It wasn't anything that I made money off of. But somewhere around 2008, 2009, I was able to start monetizing it. We were running ads on it, and I was working one-off with companies to review products for them, write a review of the product, or go on an experience for them. And that was sort of the intro to influencer marketing. We just didn't call it that at the time. And it was very a one-off relationship, and then that morphed into working with some companies who were dipping their toes into, what if we have a collective group of bloggers talking about the same thing? My love of personal blogging is what drove me to Ignite social media, where you and I were colleagues together, and I was the community manager. on a Fortune 50 brand. And it was there that I really got to see content and user generated content and the rise of influencers being used for social media content on Facebook channels and Twitter channels and YouTube. When I left Ignite to go to Citrix and really bring that storytelling aspect to the brand side, that's where I looked and noticed that there was an opportunity, even in the B2B space, for there to be an influencer program for us to really harness rabid advocates of our product. And even now in my role as a content manager, I look more holistically at how content and influencer content and our customers can really be integrated into a full campaign. So it's funny watching it go from a personal hobby into something that really generates an entire integrated campaign for a brand.
Awesome. Yeah. So thank you for that. And I think the folks here today are really gonna, they're gonna get a lot out of that experience you've had where you've seen it from the influencer side, from the agency side, from the brand side. And I think, everyone today that's here is probably here because, they are either already investing or becoming one of those marketers who is considering heavier investment in influencer marketing. We're seeing this industry become a multi-billion dollar industry. 92% of marketers are saying that they've seen their influencer marketing campaigns be effective. 70% of them are predicting that by the end of this year, their budgets are going to have significantly increased. So brands are starting to spend more and more money and put more and more emphasis into influencer marketing. But as that's happening, we're seeing these mistakes that I think are coming from the history of influencer and how it's evolved over time. There's a lot of things changing and a lot of strategies that work and strategies that don't work. And it's kind of hard for brands to keep up. So let's start diving into what some of these mistakes are that we're seeing.
Yeah.
You want to talk to us about the first one?
Yeah, I do. So what I see as sort of mistake number one is putting all of your money into celebrities. I do think that there is a time and a place for, using that top tier influencer, that top tier thought leader. But they can quickly wipe out your budget, especially when you are getting off the ground. And, you can't always guarantee that they're going to reach exactly who you want to reach. The other thing that we've run into is, it doesn't necessarily feel authentic. Sometimes I think they want to pitch it like stars. They're just like us. Like, look at me eating my yogurt. But
I look just like that when I eat my yogurt,
Yeah, I look just like that when I eat my yogurt in the morning. But it doesn't come across as authentic, and the users can really suss that out. So it's not as effective as speaking to somebody that they can feel an identity with.
So
that. So I think the way that we move away from that is really focusing on, that middle ground. So the people that have a lot of influence who, are able to speak directly to the audience, who, create content in what, I like to call the watering holes. In a B2B market, I work really closely with my product marketing managers and talk about the buyer needs, the audience needs, and where they get their information. And so I'm able to look at, okay, who are the people right there in that moment creating that content? And those are the people we want. So the people that are in that moment, in that space, that are meeting our customers right there.
Yeah, and you make a good point about, starting to decide who are the influencers you're working with. And that great segue, by the way, leads us to number two.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so what I see a lot is a mistake that brands are making where they're starting to, as they invest more, as the more activity starts to happen in influencer marketing, they're looking for ways, both on the brand side and on the agency side, to make it easier, make these campaigns not so complicated to run. And as a result, though, we tend to see a lot of these opt-in programs. So brands are going out, agencies are going out to source influencers through what are typically called influencer marketplaces. Think Blog Lovin', Izea are two kind of big examples that come to mind. And the problem with those is the way these marketplaces typically run is you post an assignment and you kind of set some criteria, and the criteria can't be too specific. And then that assignment goes out to anybody who meets that criteria. And then the first people to opt in and say, hey, I want to play along. I want to write about your yogurt brand, or, whatever it is. I want to write about that dress that you're promoting. The first people to kind of raise their hand and say, sign me up, are the ones who get to do the work. And the problem with that is these people haven't been thoroughly vetted. You don't know if they've, worked with a competitor last week, because that's not something that they're typing into their profile on this platform. You don't know what type of quality they do. And what I tend to see is the folks who are those first people to raise their hand and say, sign me up. When you go to their blog or you go to their Facebook or Twitter account, what you see is that every single post has hashtag ad in it. And if you look very closely, the only people that are even engaging with that content are other influencers who are part of their little network. You see this a lot with certain networks that I won't name, where the engagements are only happening from other influencers on that network. It's all manufactured and none of it's real. And so how do we get around this? Well, we need to be very, very selective of the influencers that we choose. And, for us, you can't take for granted the amount of time that takes. When we execute programs, it is the number one thing we spend the most time on, is building our influencer list and constantly vetting exactly who we're going to curate for a campaign. We have an ABC approach that looks at who's the audience that this influencer reaches. Are they their personal character, are they a fit for this brand? Is their voice a fit for this brand? Are they a good representation for the brand? And then as far as the key messages and products that we want them to promote, is their content a natural fit? Would they write about this product and say the things that we're hoping they're going to say in this campaign if we weren't partnering with them at all? Would they naturally do that? And only then can we really decide that they're the right person to partner with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as much as we do want to control this message, though, that doesn't always work either, does it?
It doesn't, and I think that that's another mistake that companies get into. And it's such an easy trap to fall into, because you want to protect your brand, and you feel very passionately about the message that you're getting out there. And you're also more than likely putting a lot of money behind this campaign, so you need it to succeed. And you need a message pull through on a specific message. So the gut instinct is to, really control this message and to tell the influencer what you want them to say. But again, it goes back to it not feeling authentic. It goes back to the celebrity eating yogurt on a sunny couch, because it doesn't resonate as well. You want the influencer to have creative freedom. You want them to express themselves in an authentic way that will resonate with the audience and the community that they've built and that they know. You have to trust your influencer that they understand their community. And I think one way that you can control the message yet not over control the message, because you do have to control it on some level, is by creating a brief up front. So it might look like a creative brief where you outline assignments, 5 things that must be in the assignment, but they have creative freedom of what that might look like. I personally work in a lot of regulated industries. So for me, it's even a little different. Instead of a creative brief, we draw up more of a contract. And the content goes back through our legal department. So one way to do this is to just over communicate with the influencer what you're looking for, the freedom you want them to have, and then over communicate with your legal team, so that you let them know that they're not there to control the message. They're there to make sure everything is factual and that you're not going to get in trouble. A lot of times I say sit down with your legal team. Don't just send it to them. Don't just email it to them, but sit down with them and have a meeting with them where you can describe what's going to happen. Because a lot of times your legal team won't understand that. And in a regulated industry, that's really important.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that I see this happen a lot where brands are so concerned, and their legal teams, are so concerned with um, FTC compliance as far as influencer content is concerned. So making sure that that sponsorship is disclosed, which we'll talk about in a second, but then also making sure that the brand is protected and properly represented. And I think what the other kind of mistake on this over controlling the message topic that folks make is they forget, and I find legal teams forget that the FTC rules on endorsements apply. We spend so much time talking about FTC guidelines regarding influencer disclosures that we forget if an influencer says that everything that I'm saying is my own opinion, it must in fact be their own opinion, and we cannot tell them what to say as far as their opinion about the product. So, I see this happen a lot where brands start to toe the line and legal teams just aren't thinking about this being an endorsement. So while they're very smart people, they don't consider that as something that needs to be considered when you're looking at this content that's being created and when you're giving that guideline. So we've got to be very careful in, not just over controlling the message, but what parts of the message are we trying to control?
Yep, exactly. Exactly. And I think just being best friends with your legal department and really educating them on influencer marketing is a key to avoiding this.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's move on to mistake number 4, which as a influencer marketing company that really takes this media-based approach, we're starting to see folks, as organic reach continues to decline or is basically non-existent at the time at this point, at least on certain channels. Brands are starting to see that they do need to put some media dollars behind this influencer content. But we see that the way brands that the intention is there, but the strategy is lacking. We're seeing brands waste a lot of money because they're doing it two ways. They're either, and agencies are doing this too. It's not just the brands themselves, but the agencies on behalf of these brands. They are giving the influencer here's an extra $100 to boost your content. We want to make sure it gets seen. Or they're just going in and they're using on Facebook, they're able to use the handshake tool and they're able to put, an extra 100,000, 5,000, whatever it is, extra dollars behind every piece of content that goes out because they want to make sure it's seen. Now, this is a very, very big mistake. It sounds like it's well-intentioned, but the problem is they're not being strategic in which content they're boosting. And so we like to think of influencer organic audiences, even though they're small, we like to think of them as a focus group, right? And that focus group really starts to tell us which content is resonating, which key messages are people picking up on. And so we're able to start scoring the content based on how it is delivering against the objectives of the campaign. And only then do we decide which content to boost. So for us, this scoring happens in two ways. We have an algorithm that kind of lets the best content bubble to the top. And then we put eyes on every piece of content because it's not just that, hey, this piece of content got the highest engagement rate. When you dive in and it's a post about yogurt and everyone's talking about, oh my gosh, your dogs are so cute, they didn't even realize that this was a post about yogurt. So yeah, maybe it got millions of engagements organically, but if that wasn't, those engagements are not picking up on the key messages we're trying to get across, those aren't really the type of engagements we want. And so it's really important
Exactly.
that you're not just using, the data, but you're also putting eyes on all this content. One of the other issues that we see when we have this practice of, just putting a few dollars behind a handshake tool post on Facebook, or having the influencers go ahead and do the boosting themselves, is that the targeting's missing. So we have our in-house media team that has advertising access to these influencer handles. And so they're able to go in and they're actually able to not just do all of the targeting and optimize against all these different audience sets, but they're also able to take the creative and apply different types of ad units to it so that we can optimize that way too. What we've seen, and I saw this just a few weeks ago, because we've put a lot of effort into making sure that we're looking for potential fraud in influencer content. We don't give our influencers extra money to boost. We do the boosting in-house. But we saw an influencer who actually did her own boosting, and we could see this through the handshake tool. And what I was able to see in the handshake tool is that she was getting a 30-cent CPM on a post, or for a campaign that was supposed to be targeted to moms between the ages of 35 and 44 in the US. If you have ever had a target that is even quite broad like that, you know that a 30-cent CPM on Facebook is impossible to get. And so told me right away that, she was boosting this post, but it was going nowhere close to our target audience. And that's exactly the type of thing that we don't want to happen. And if you're not handling the boosting yourself, if you don't have a media team running this boosting and really optimizing it on a daily basis, you risk, yeah, great, I got a bunch of engagements, I got a bunch of impressions, but there weren't the right types of engagements, they weren't the right impressions for my target audience. And at the end of the day, you're really not hitting your business objectives that way. I also mentioned that we would talk about the FTC. It is surprising to me how many companies still don't want to follow FTC guidelines. You think we've been talking about this for years, and still today I see companies come to us and they're like, wait, are you sure they have to put hashtag ad? Like, we don't want them to do that. And we hear from influencers that, brands are also coming to them and saying, yeah, don't do that. We don't want you to do that. And the problem is that's obviously against FTC guidelines, and you don't want to be the brand that the FTC makes an example of. They've come out and they've made examples of some influencers, they've made a couple examples of brands, but I think they're really waiting for that kind of flagship case. And the FTC is smart. For a government agency, these people are more in touch than I have ever seen, and they know what they're doing. They're coming out with very, very specific guidelines. And so ignoring those guidelines when they are being so specific and kind of serving it to you on a silver platter is not the best move. We have a whole extra video on this, so I'm not going to really belabor this topic. We will send it out. We can actually drop it in the comments. So you can see the link if you want to hear about the FTC mistakes that people are making, because that's a whole other conversation in itself. But I will just say that, the kind of key message with that, beyond just making sure that your FTC disclosures are clear and conspicuous, they have come out and been very specific about which hashtags are acceptable and which aren't. And not only what the hashtag should say, but where it is placed. That is the number one mistake. There was a recent study that came out that looked at Instagram posts that had hashtag ad in them, or sponsored Instagram posts, and why something like 70% or so of these sponsored Instagram posts you could tell had attempted to be compliant, only 24% were actually compliant. And so that tells us that while people aren't trying necessarily to ignore the FTC, they really don't understand what those guidelines are saying, given the FTC has come out and been very specific about where those disclosures have to occur and how they need to occur. So moving on to number 6, Beth Ann, talk to us about one-off programs. We tend to see this a lot.
Yeah, and I'm going to, kind of segue off of what you were saying, because one of the benefits of not doing one-off programs and creating long-term relationships with influencers is that You don't have to revisit these FTC guidelines over and over again. You can condition your influencers, and they're used to working with you, and they know your expectations. So that's one benefit of it. So what we see a lot of is a one-off program. And what I mean by that is you have a campaign that runs for 1 quarter, and you want one influencer or a group of influencers to run very specific content. You pay them, you boost the content, and then it's done. And then you kind of never see the content again. You never speak with the influencers again. Everybody goes their separate way. And one of the things I'm gonna speak to both why this is a mistake and a way to negate this is it doesn't create relationships, and it doesn't create trust, not only with your brand, but with that influencer's community and your brand. So what you're trying to do with the influencer is not just, get message pull through and message penetration, but you're also trying to build brand trust. And when the influencer is working with you long term, it conveys that you are a brand that they trust and that they want to work with and that they enjoy. On a B2B side, for me, having a SaaS product, it's very much that long-term relationship lets our influencers get down and dirty with the product. They get to get into the product, they get to use it every day, they get to see its flaws and its benefits, and they can really speak to that. And they can start answering questions for us to their community, where they really become product experts for us, not just advocates, but experts. So that's why, don't do the one-off programs. Go for those long-term relationships. The other thing it can do is it can create demand within those industries to be part of your program when they see perks. So we spoke a little bit about the opt-in, but what you may start seeing is other influencers wanting to work with you, jumping at the chance to work with you, because they see the other thought leaders that are working with you. They're seeing the perks of being an influencer with your company, and that gets them excited. So that's really how the benefits to doing the long-term influencer strategy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. What we tend to see when we do long-term influencer strategies, because we're starting to learn how these influencers perform, because they learn what we like, because they feel that connection with the brand, and we're able to get more out of them, and they want to do more for us. At Carousel, we have what we call iStack, and it's this algorithm that ranks the performance of every influencer in our campaign based on not only how they performed against our objectives, but the efficiency at which we were able to get those objectives out of them. And that's how we start to optimize which influencers are going to become part of this long-term brand strategy. Which influencers worked on programs where it makes sense for the brand to really tie themselves to the influencer long-term. And what we see in doing that is the efficiency gets better and better over time. So we've seen engagement rates from the beginning to the end of a year-long ambassador program increase by as much as 400%. We've seen the cost per engagement decrease by as much as 65%. So, seeing that efficiency, the proof is in the numbers right there. What you're able to get out of these influencers when you are working with them in a more of a long-term relationship, ambassador style programming where it's always on, or you're continuing to reactivate the same people in this pulse style activations, much, much more efficient than just checking the influencer box every time you want to do a big brand marketing campaign and, going out and finding new people every time.
Exactly.
So Beth Ann, we are at number 6, but as you and I were preparing for this yesterday, I feel like we came up with a great reminder for people that are kind of getting into these influencer programs, and we added a bonus mistake here. So talk to me about that bonus mistake.
I did. So I was sitting here going, the one mistake that I see people making, and I would caution against as someone who stood up an influencer program at a brand, is setting the metrics that matter at the start. It's so easy to get really excited about an influencer program, and what you need to do is to really decide from the very beginning, what are the metrics that are going to matter to the business? What is going to tell my execs that we need to continue this program? What are the campaign metrics that are really going to matter? Is it impressions and engagement rate, or is it a click-through rate? Is it a conversion? Is it a lower CPM and a higher engagement rate? Is it that combination? So really speaking to your leadership and the stakeholders that are going to be helping you make decisions about your program, finding out what really matters to them, and then setting up the programs to measure against these metrics. It's so much easier to set up the programs correctly in Marketo, in Salesforce, before you go out than to go back, scramble, and go, oh no, I didn't have the correct tracking on this, and I don't have Google Analytics reporting on this. And then you're going, well, I spent this money and I got this many impressions, and your exec team goes, well, impressions don't mean anything to us. So, really setting yourself up for success as someone who is kicking off a program or getting buy-in, because the other thing it's going to do is prove the ROI so that you can do the next program and the next program. And that is just so important moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, you make a good point about defining the KPIs. And I think what's important too is it's not even just setting up the ability to track, but
Right.
for us, we can optimize a campaign for reach. We can optimize a campaign for web traffic. We can optimize a campaign for sales conversion. What we can't do is, have a sales, a campaign that was designed to drive, or in hopes, wanting to drive sales. You want to tell your executives that you drove sales, but the whole campaign was designed to optimize against reach and get as many influencers as possible with the biggest reach possible. Well, if the campaign needs to prove that it could drive sales at the end of the day, that's not the best strategy. That is the best strategy if you're doing a brand awareness campaign, if you're launching a new product, if you're trying to get a message out there, then maybe audience penetration is your ultimate goal, and that's what you're optimizing toward. But if you're trying to drive sales, you got to build the campaign so it's optimized to drive those trackable sales. Otherwise, you might get that ROI, but you're not going to be able to prove it at the end of the day.
Exactly.
So with that, we have talked about a lot of mistakes. I hope that was, incredibly helpful for you guys today. And we are going to move on to questions. So I see some submitted here. If you do have questions that you want us to answer and you have not done that yet, go ahead and drop them into the question box in the GoToWebinar session, and we will start answering some questions here. So Bethy, on the first question, I think is a great one for you to answer because you've been on the brand side and you've had to kind of make the case for these influencer programs. So how do you recommend going about a test campaign if your brand is kind of just starting out or maybe not ready to invest in one of those long-term ambassador programs that we mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I spoke originally about working hand in hand with product marketing. And that is so key. So really looking at your overall marketing strategy and figuring out what is a key audience that you are going after maybe that quarter or that year. Is there a specific industry that you want to make a big ding in? And then creating a program that speaks to just that one audience. It's okay to start out small. I know that that's what I did. I picked one audience that was one of our top markets, that we already had quite a few advocates in. So it was also easy to source in that I was able to tap both customers and thought leaders. We already had a lot of brand awareness, and it was a top market for us. So, and then putting a little bit of money behind some content creation and some content syndication. Again, back to that sort of bonus mistake, making sure that you're communicating with your execs so that you're getting the metrics on it that are going to matter and prove an ROI to try another one. But I would work with your entire marketing strategy, with your product marketing group, and pick one small segment, one small marketing segment, one message to go out with in one quarter and just test it.
I love that point because I'll tell you from the agency side, there's so many times where brands will come to us and they want to do everything. They want to go after their broad messaging, their broad target, but they want to do a test campaign with a small budget first. And I think you make a great point that, if you want to, at the end of the day, if you want to prove that this worked, you can't try to do it all on a shoestring budget. Instead, let's figure out how do we make if we do have a small budget, how can that budget make an impact? And typically it's going after a smaller audience. We see this a lot of times where brands will come to us and they're like, I want to see sales impact. And so we'll recommend, okay, let's focus on just a web traffic campaign, or let's focus so we're not trying to reach audiences in the entire US, but let's look at just the New York City market. Or, we did a program for Tyson where we just focused on the Dallas market, and we were able to test performance in Dallas versus other markets in Texas that had everything pretty much the same, except for the fact that influencer was really focused in Dallas. And, that's where all of our content was running and where all of our media was running. And so, they were able to really prove out how influencer impacted what was happening in this product launch as a whole by just focusing on a single market with influencer. So I think you make a great point there.
Yeah. It doesn't, when we talk about metrics, it doesn't have to be every metric in the book. You can really prove the value of influencer marketing just if, let's say, you get a lower CPM than traditional, a traditional media buy, with a higher engagement rate. So just those two things together can really prove an ROI. You don't have to have every metric in the book when you're looking at a small campaign. You can look at a small amount of metrics as well.
Good point.